Here we are on page 101 of your workbook. It's section 9.2, and we're going to learn how to make tables and graphs. So this is a frequency table that we're constructing here. So I'm going to use the tally method, or just start to show you that. Then I'm going to fill in the rest of the table. So to know what my interval should be, I kind of need to judge. There is a formula. You could do the class width range, like the interval range that you want it to be, equals the overall range from you're going to take the highest value minus the lowest value and divide that by the number of intervals you want. Likewise, you can kind of figure out like what you want your intervals to be, and then figure out how many lines to draw here. So I have, I'm going to push this up, I have 6 intervals that I'm going to have total, or classes, and then my class width is going to be, start with 85 and go up to 94. So technically that seems like it would be 9, but we do count the number that we start on, so it's really 10. And there's a formula on the next page that you can look into more in your book. This is where I was talking about there's a little bit of inconsistency in this textbook. So I do judge how I want it to be. If you're given something and says, well, you have to have 6 classes, or say it said 7, and it comes out to be an oddball number here where it's not going to make so much sense to stagger it the way you want, then you can adjust that a little bit. Usually if I give a number, it's because it works out well, or because I want everybody to match, but I'm not nitpicky about that at all. So the thing to remember, though, you want to not count, like you don't want to repeat the 94 here. The next one here we would put as 95. So each time we're adding 10 here. Even though we have, 85 plus 9 is 94, it's really a width of 10. So I'm going to fill in the rest of that, but just to show you how I would tally this up if I had a bigger data set. If I had a real big one, I would just use a computer, but we're just trying to get you to see like how to do things by hand and what they look like. So here's anything from 85 to 94. So I would just look at the first one here. It doesn't fit any of those. I'm going to have to add on here a little bit. I have 105 to 114. And I will fill in all of these down the line eventually. And then, so this 110, I'm going to use it, and I'm going to put a tick mark right here where there would be 110. And then 85, I would put a tick mark. 85, tick mark. That way I know I don't miss any. And then 85, tick mark, especially if they're not in order. Now, if they're in order, then you can go ahead and do it any way that you like. You can even just count them up, here easily enough, but it's up to you. I just want to show you what the tally method is, and if you'd like to use that. So then I would go to 138 and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop this and fill it in, and you fill it in too, and I'll meet you back here in a minute. Okay, so once you get everything filled in for your tallies, then do make sure you total up and get your frequencies for each class. Then you're going to also do a relative frequency, because the question specifically asks for that. This is 16 randomly selected weights of models from a model agency. Kind of sad here, pretty low weights. Construct a frequency table and include relative frequencies. So for the relative frequencies, you could do a reduced fraction, you could do a decimal or a percent. I do like to work in percent usually, so that's what I'll tend to show. So if you have to round, you could go out 1 or 2 places. Usually for a percentage, you go to the nearest 10th or 100th of a percent. So now having that done, we're going to want to make a histogram with that same data from this this model, the model weights. So anytime you do this, actually I should have a title here. Again, I should have, you know, this is a frequency table of model weights. And, you know, just be kind of brief. If you're doing it for a project or something and you know, want it to look really nice, then do a better job with that. But for the notes and homeworks, just, you know, sketch it out. So here's the histogram. We want the sides to touch, but it's the same as a bar graph in general. So again, it would just be a similar title, just saying like histogram of model weights. I'm going to make it long enough here. So here on the side, you would write frequency, and on the bottom, you're going to put that it's the weight in pounds, and then you're going to title it. I'll add all that in momentarily. You could do it as the percentage if you wanted to, or you could do it as the number. I might do the relative frequency actually, because it doesn't specify which one I have to have, but I think I showed just a regular frequency kind of the bar graph. So for they would have the same shape, but just the scale is going to be a little bit different. So if I look at my data, my highest percent is 25. So I think I want to maybe go by like 10, 20, 30, 40, and that's really, you know, as high as I need to go. And I could do 50% here. And I know this is 10 and so on and so forth. So I do need to label at least some of those. And then now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to set up the bottom. So we're not starting at 0. Your textbook actually doesn't make you use class boundaries. It just has you use the numbers in the class width. So we'll do that too. So 85 and then 95, 105, and you want them equidistant, and so on and so forth. I'll add those in. I'll stop it and let you do that. I just want to save time. I don't want to do it, take too long with this. So between 85 and 95, our data said it was 25%. So I'm just going to put a little line here. I'm going to use my straight edge, and I'm going to draw a line down to here and here. And again, graph paper would be beneficial maybe. And then the next thing is 18.75. So if this is 10 and this is 20, 18.75 is going to be kind of right about here. And then notice how the difference is with the histogram, I'm putting them one right next to another. Okay, so follow that same procedure down the line, labeling your axes, and then check back. Okay, so here is the full graph. And I usually do these on the computer, like for a stats class, you would do that, but by hand is fine. I think you get the idea of this shape. You can see where it's pretty uniform, really, except on the higher end. One thing to note here, no gaps, no overlaps with the histogram. Make sure you get the last bit of the data there as well. Label each axis and write a title. If there is 0, this is, I guess you could call this a gap, but it's really just showing, you know, 0. So I kind of did draw a little line at 0, but you don't need to do that. Now this data set we'll look at is nice because it's all sorted in order of lowest to highest. So the total cost of textbooks for the term was collected from 36 students. Create a frequency table with 8 class intervals. I'll tell you why I have a little bit different layout, but be sure to include the relative frequencies, then construct a histogram for this data. And this one you could choose, I'll let you choose. I'm going to do a frequency histogram because I did a relative earlier, or you could just do the relative if you like. So I have, this is going to be my class width here, the frequency table. You'll probably need a separate sheet for your histogram. And how do I know what the class width will be? Right here, or class range they call it. Usually it's called width in most books. But you take the largest value minus the smallest value. So we go ahead and figure that out. I think we have 460 minus 140. So we have 320. So I'm just going to write it right up here for this one. So we have 460 minus the 140. And then the number of class intervals they wanted you to divide by 8. And when we do that, we get 40. And that's fine, but what's going to happen is we don't quite get our last little bit. Because remember, we don't want to have any overlaps. So I think, the person who wrote the workbook wasn't kind of taking into consideration a couple things here. But if we do 140 to 179, even though again that looks like, 140 plus 39 is 179, but it's actually, we want to count the ends. So the 140 is in the count, so it's really 40 items. Like if you were to do counting on your fingers, you would have 40 items. So we want to include that there. And then this one, because we don't want to write 180 here and then 180 here again. So we want to write the 180 is where we take up, and then 219 would be the next one. And notice each time, so here's where each time I'm adding on that 40. Okay, so I only have to look at this one side. 180 plus 40 gives me the 220. And 219 plus 40 gives me 259. So that's how I can figure it out. You will see a pattern in how they work out. Now to figure out the frequency, since this is in order, I don't need to do the tally method. I can just look, okay, 140 up to 179. So I don't want to hit the 180, but it's all these right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can just go ahead and write the 4 there. Then I know it's out of 36, so I can do 4 out of 36. And I'm just going to go ahead and make that be a percentage, 11.1%. Now, once you get these percentages, if you were to add them all up, I will tell you it comes out a little off just because of rounding error, but don't worry about that. It's close enough. So go ahead and fill in the table, and you can just do percentages here, knowing that, your total is going to be 36 for all your, items. So go ahead and figure that out. So you can see here where I just chunked up the data matching up to the class widths, and I got 4, 1, 4, 6, 10, 6, 2, 1, and 2. So just make sure you're right with those and then do the relative frequencies. Okay, so here are all the percentages that you can make sure you're matching up with. One thing I do want to point out, this last couple bits of data here, 460, if I had just stopped at 8 classes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, then I wouldn't have gotten those last 2 bits in. So I really did need to add those overflow, or I needed to, beef that up a little. there's an example in the You Try It in your book. They do it a little bit differently, and there's answers in the end of the section for that too. So I wanted to point that out. Now for the histogram, we're going to keep that handy, but here's your layout of what the histogram will look like. I've already kind of set mine up. Histogram of textbook costs. I put frequency here. I'm going to push this up. And on the bottom here is the cost, total cost in dollars. I could say of textbooks, but we have that in the title too. So then I've just done like a scale of 5 and 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now I'm going to just mark off. I have relative frequency. I'm doing a frequency over here. So I'm going to have my line at 4. And then just draw my lines down. Just how you did before. Make sure you get it over so there's not going to be a gap. And I will go ahead and fill those in, and then we can look at the shape of this. Okay, so here is that histogram in full. So double check yours against mine. And let me know if you have any questions about that. Okay, so I just want to take a second to talk about the shape of this. You can see where this is a little bit high, but then it drops down. But the general shape is it peaks up here between $300 and $340 and then drops off again. So the other type of graph that we want to make is called a frequency polygon, which will have the same type of shape in general as the histogram, but we draw it just a little bit differently. It's probably how you're more used to graphing things. So it's kind of nice. Sometimes we just lay the frequency polygon right on top of a histogram if you're doing both, just to show that you know what each is. This one I'm going to do a relative frequency polygon so that you can see how the shape, even though it's a percentage now, how it stays pretty much the same. So 160 we're going to use instead of the interval that we were using before, because frequency polygons, we use the midpoint of each interval. Technically, the midpoint would have been 159.5, but your book does, they just actually take the midpoint between the two classes. So 160 would be fine. And we can know from our data that was 11.1%. So if I kind of have these as my little tick marks here, so this is 10%, so 11.1 is right about there. And instead of putting a line this time, I'm just going to put a dot. So go ahead and do that. This one's pretty small here, 2.8%, so that's probably like 5%, so it's going to be down there. So I'm going to go fill that in. You can do that also. So now once I have all these dots put down, I'm going to go ahead and connect them just with straight lines. It's nice to use a straight edge, but as long as you can keep, they're pretty short segments, so you can probably keep it pretty good. Now, what do I do with the ends here? You just want to drop them down to the axis. Just leave them just like that. Just drop them down so you're not like kind of up in the air there. And then that's really it. Notice I have a title. I've labeled both axes. I got my data far enough out to cover all of the data values, and that is it for the graphing. Then next section, we'll do measures of central tendency. Now, if you're reading the book and you're finding that you can go along and do these without the video, just go ahead and make sure you do double check all your answers at the solutions. But a lot of this, I will show on the calculator how to do it, and sometimes people have trouble spots with that. So in the next section, if you have been just working along the workbook and not necessarily watching all of the videos, this one you might want to hone in on how to enter data into the calculator and not have to do it out the long way. Thanks for watching.